Okay, so what's freedom? Freedom, is that what you have to give away in order to get it? Freedom is a combination of love and boundaries. Those are the two root words in Old Gothic and Sanskrit. That's for the nerds of us out there. So what can we do to experience freedom? Freedom is something that we all want to have, but are we willing to give it to other people? You know, Jesus had a problem with freedom. His family, I have gotten in trouble for saying this. I've even gotten letters on this one. But Jesus came from a dysfunctional family. And the proof is found in Mark. And Mark was the first of the Gospels written, and they cleaned up did a little editing in Matthew and Luke. But in Mark, this is what his family did. And we're talking here St. Mary, St. Jude, and St. James. Then Jesus went home, and a crowd gathered around him, so they couldn't even eat. And when his family heard about it, they tried to take him by force, saying, "He is out of his mind."
Oh.
His disciples told him, "Your brothers and mother are standing outside." And he told them, "Only those who do my Father's will are my mother and brothers, and only they will enter God's kingdom." It's pretty tough. What did Jesus do in this situation? He didn't argue with them. But he asserted in a non-defensive way the boundary of his own being. I assert the boundary of my own being. Together. I assert the boundary of my own being. I define who I am. Together. I define who I am. And I'm not going to argue about it. Together. And I'm not going to argue about it. Now, how many people in this room have people who like to argue with them about religion or politics, or even worse yet, put their posts on their Facebook page, that kind of, raise your hand, you got those kind of people? And what do you do in those situations? Well, you tell them what's for. You stand up for your principles. Or do you realize that maybe they've just got an overactive amygdala and an underdeveloped neocortex, and they're just charging that energy? I swore I wasn't going to say any more nerd stuff, but that's the truth. They put people up to brain scan stuff, and they found out that the people who hold the least enlightened social positions in issues tend to have overactive amygdala. So what's an amygdala? It's also known as the reptilian brain. It's the fear, fight and flight, paranoia. They're out to get me. Ain't it awful? Awful, awful, awful stuff. And what's the neocortex? It's the higher mind. It's the higher part of you. And they found those things, okay? They found a few other things, too. They found that the people who believe in the Bible the most believe in it. Not practice or read it, but just believe in it. Have the least progressive social positions, the least enlightened. But the more people read the Bible, the more progressive and open-minded they become on social issues. And it's cumulative, the more and more and more. Why? Because there's a lot of good stuff in there about loving your neighbor as yourself, not throwing stones, taking care of the less fortunate, and all kinds of things that's hard to read when you're using the book as a weapon to hit other people over the head. You got to crack it open and look at it. I'm sharing this to say, what are we going to do? Well, what are we going to do is free other people to believe what they choose. Because the reality is, think about a time in your life when you held a position that right now you would find even reprehensible, or you would just, think about that time, that in your past, when you thought something or believed something and you go, I don't even want to go there. Everyone else is like that too, and if it wasn't in this life, it's another life before this. So realize that whatever anybody's expressing around you, they're going through that period of time in their life that they need freedom of being, but not necessarily behavior. Whoa. So where do boundaries fit into it? Well, remember, I always talk about the Harvard studies of spontaneous remissions. As a minister in 35 years, I've probably met well over 100 people who have had spontaneous remissions. That means a terminal or incurable illness that cleared up. We call them miracles in the religious world, but what is it? It's that a shift in belief systems happened. A shift in beliefs. Albert Schweitzer said the greatest discovery in all human history is when somebody realized that you could change your world by changing your beliefs. And if you change your beliefs, you change your world. But what's the big belief that changes? What's the big shift that changes? The idea that you don't have to control the people around you and that you can set non-defensive boundaries. I set non-defensive boundaries. Together? I set non-defensive boundaries. What is a non-defensive boundary? It's one that allows other people to be who they choose to be, and yet may set boundaries on behavior and doesn't try to get the point across, get agreement, argue, kvetch. You know, when Peter said to Jesus, Jesus, I'm going to stand up for you forever. And Jesus said, by tomorrow morning when the rooster crows, you're going to deny me 3 times. He didn't go, now Peter, if you loved me, you would blah, blah, blah. And, yeah, don't you see? No. He realized, as Charles Fillmore said, that there are 2 ways of learning. One is the easy way. That is through meditation and guidance and learning here and that wonderful book you read and all that good stuff. And then there's the hard way, which is through hard experience. And sometimes, you ready for this? The hard way is the easier way, meaning it's the more direct way. Sometimes you can cut through a whole bunch of karma and hoo-ha by just learning the hard way, and you let other people be and do what they choose to be and do without any insistence that they satisfy you. That is the famous definition of love set up early in his career by Wayne Dyer. Love is the ability and willingness to allow other people to be and do what they choose to be and do without any insistence that they satisfy you. To be, actually not and do, because you got to sometimes set boundaries around yourself, but in their own life, you set them free. When I was growing up, I grew up in California, and I noticed in the Central Valley where I ended up going to college, there were canals crisscrossing because in the summer they didn't have any rain, so they had to irrigate. So these canals would carry the water, and I noticed something very interesting. They could move a lot of water if they had good boundaries. They had nice, distinct boundaries, and you could move a lot of water. Well, the water is the love. It's the love, and then of course the walls of the canal, that's the boundary. So you've got to have both love and logic. Lynn teaches love and logic. And our daughter came to us about 2 years ago and said, when she was in high school, she was a sophomore at the time, she said, you know, I've been asking myself, what is it you did with me that I didn't end up like those kids I see in school? I'm going to do that when I have kids. Talk about a wonderful thing to hear, but it's because love and logic, love and boundaries, being willing, but doing it in a non-defensive way. That's the trick. How do you set boundaries in a non-defensive way? How do you do it in a way that doesn't manipulate, coerce, control, try to get everybody to see? It's very tricky, but it means that you've got to loose them and let them go. If you can loose their beingness and let their beingness go, and then just deal with the behavior, you'll be much better off. And you don't have to get agreement. You just need to be willing to have, as Lynn teaches, enforceable boundaries. Enforceable boundaries. Those are things that you do have control over. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. Courage to change the things I can. And the wisdom to know the difference. What can you change? What are you capable of changing? You're capable of changing certain things, but you can't change what's in a person's head. I love that. It came to me once. I was counseling somebody, and they were trying to get the person in their life to change and to get it and to understand and all that stuff. And it was reminding me of when Jason and Rosalie were very little, and they were at that age where you could take the baby food and you try to get them to eat, and sometimes they wouldn't eat. And you can go, rum, rum, here comes a roar. You can do all kinds of things to raise the odds that they will open their mouth. But sometimes they would just spit it out. The reality is no person in this room has ever made a baby eat anything. Because you can't make them swallow. You can do all kinds of things. There are things you can control. You can raise the odds. And communication is important, and we've got to put it. But you also have to understand other people have the right. And so, as Fillmore said, sometimes it's a hard way, sometimes it's the easy way. The hard way is the kid gets hungry enough that they'll finally swallow. And that works. So where in your life, the essence of life is freedom. The essence of my life is freedom. Together? The essence of my life is freedom. And so I set everyone free. Together? And so I set everyone free. And it doesn't mean you have to be a victim. It doesn't mean that you have to get along, go along with everything, but you do the things that you can do and enforce the things you can enforce. There was a woman who had a spontaneous remission. My very first church, it was when she got AIDS from a blood transfusion, and it was in the days before AZT, and she had a 100% spontaneous remission without the ability to have the medical treatment today. And she said she did it this way. These are her words as best I can remember it. I decided to live my life from this one bedrock question. Does this ultimately contribute to my well-being and that of others? If not, I don't do it. Let me say that again. Does this ultimately contribute to my well-being and that of others? If not, I don't do it. So you ask yourself, is this contributing to my well-being and that of others? How much of our lives is wasted doing things out of obligation, or out of expectation, or out of guilt, or out of what we think other people want us to do? So I've experienced, I remember in middle school I had a teacher. He was the best teacher I had ever had up to that point. He taught, it was his passion. It's called following your bliss. Following that which your heart is telling you to do. It's not just doing what you want to do, or if it feels good, do it, because Joseph Campbell was very clear on that. He's the guy who came up with follow your bliss. He says it isn't some, if it feels good, do it. It's what is my heart telling me to do. And this guy was a high-level corporate lawyer on the board of directors of several major corporations in San Francisco, and he had made all his money, and he got sick. He went to the hospital, and there he had an epiphany. He realized, I'm not living my life. What is it I really want to do? I want to teach children. And so he went back, got his teaching certificate, and he taught us, and I'm telling you, he had something to teach. You know, I knew a guy when I was in ministerial school who was the mayor of a nearby town. And he was the top, he had a PhD in economics, he was the top energy analyst in that part of the country. He wrote speeches for the mayor of Kansas City. He was a big-time guy. And what he did every day was unlock the gate and sit in his junkyard where he had old cars. And he said, I realized that my joy in life was working on old cars. He restored them. And so what I wanted to do was to give the highest level of spiritual service. He was a Buddhist meditator. The highest level of spiritual service for people who wanted to buy used parts. I'm telling you this because it's not a grandiose thing. You know, we think we flip it. We say, oh, we want to be the big shot. No. What is your bliss? What makes your heart sing? Where can you engage yourself with your spiritual principles, with your spiritual growth in such a way that you can make a difference in the world? And I'm telling you right now, it's probably right where you are. It's probably, if you're waiting tables, if you're working in a store, if you're doing a specific thing, it's probably what you're doing right now. Moving past the need to do something to please another person, but doing it out of the great joy of your soul. But realize that, just like Jesus, you can set boundaries and live your life from your own internal song. This is really a tricky thing, but it's a powerful one. You know, Jesus talked about this in terms of dealing with other people. And people think that he taught people to be a victim and to not set boundaries and to just get along, go along with everything. All people are acceptable. All people are deserving of love, he taught. But also, there's a time when you have to set boundaries. And he taught it in a very surprising way. You've heard it where he taught, turn the other cheek. And we think, turn the other cheek means be a victim. No. If you turn the other cheek, they had to use their left hand, and it humiliated them. It was a form of nonviolent resistance. He said, when somebody wants your coat, give them your cloak as well. They cleaned it up. Cloak was underwear. It means stand naked before, metaphorically. In their culture, by the way, nakedness wasn't any big deal because when they, were going through grieving, that happened a lot. But it was basically a form of nonviolent resistance. If somebody wants you to go 1 mile, go 2. That was because the Roman soldiers would require people to carry their burdens for them for a mile. And it was an unjust situation. So you carry it for 2 and it would get the soldier in trouble because the Romans weren't allowed to make people do it more than a mile. Why am I saying this? He said a lot of things. He said, agree with your adversary quickly. agree with your adversary really literally meant resolve what's in your heart. You know, it's resolve. Find a point of poise and a sense of well-being with things. In other words, forgive them and deal. So this is a balance point. What I'm talking about here is about boundaries and love. The conduit through which the love can flow are those proper boundaries, that love and logic, that those enforceable boundaries and those things that you can do. But it means in Jesus' case, what did he do? He didn't go out to talk to his mom and his brothers and say, don't you understand I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, and I need you to approve of me and validate my life choice. No. He just said, oh, my blood family won't give me what I need. Well, all these people, the people who are doing the will of God, who are aligned with my spiritual purpose, my intentional family, this is my family. That's my mother and my brothers. So you go to a 12-step meeting, so you come to church, so you have people in your life, significant people in your life, who you choose to draw from for support, who will affirm and support the who that you are in a non-defensive way. You're reaching out and creating and filling that need. And then what can you do with the blood relatives? You can let them off the hook. You don't expect that which they're unable to give. And there's that famous quote from Jesus, and people have a hard time with it, but he was a comedian. People don't realize this. So he said, do not cast your pearls before pigs. They're going to turn and rend you. And if you give what's sacred to dogs, they're going to throw it on a pile of dung. And you know what dung is. He said they won't understand. Don't try to put yourself in jeopardy by doing that. So what should you do instead? Find your support from the people who will give you the support. And then you can free those people to be who and what they choose. You say, well, I don't like their behavior. Well, what should you do when when you don't like somebody's behavior? How should you handle it? Well, if it's causing you difficulty and truly puts you in jeopardy or danger, you've got to handle it. You've got to set boundaries. You've got to do those things. And that's a good thing. But if not, loose them and let them go, fully and freely release them, and you can use that affirmation. Another thing you could do is the 7 steps. You all know about the 7 steps. It's a journaling exercise. Take those sticky people, you know who I'm talking about, and write out the questions, and you will find that you will be free to do something to resolve the situation that you never ever would have imagined. But you don't force your will on things. You know, forcing our will on things, trying to push the river, trying to push things, is one of the most destructive things we can do. How many of you know the great spiritual teacher and author Walter Starkey? Anybody hear of him? Walter Starkey was a student of Joel Goldsmith, and he had made millions of dollars, had a big ranch in Texas, but what he did was he wrote books on spirituality and toured the country speaking at the Unity churches and New Thought churches. And he told me something. I stayed at his ranch for a week, and he told me something. He said, I learned not to push things, but to let people be free to choose to have me come in or not, depending on their own level of consciousness. And as Martha Creek put it, some will, some won't, so what? And so he said, I learned this because I had my practice was always, my guidance was very clear. I needed to go only to those places that were really welcoming to wanting me to come in. So I worked it out. I was going to do a tour. I was going to speak in this town, and I was going to speak in this town, but there was a week in between that I couldn't fill. And there was a town right between the 2 towns. And it was perfect because I was going to be driving. But they didn't really want me to come speak. But I thought, oh, come on, it's a big church. I heard good things about it. It's really successful. And so he just wore them down, and they finally had him speak. He said, I showed up, and I knew immediately it wasn't the right place. The vibe wasn't right. The energy wasn't right. And he didn't work with notes. So Walter Starkey got up, he told me, and was ready to give the talk, and not a word would come out of his mouth. And he just looked at him, and he apologized to him, But he didn't have anything to say that day and went and sat down. He said, besides being humiliating, it was a great experience of letting people be. I experienced this in my first church. I was 27 years old, and the average age in the church was somewhere upwards of 75. And there were people who had a hard time with, me being who I was. And some people did leave. And my guidance, people say, well, what about Mrs. Jones? And my guidance was, don't run after people. But there was one woman, I just always got a kick out of her, always really enjoyed her, and I finally said, I got to call her. So I called her, I said, I know I'm guided not to do this, but whatever. She came back, and boy, was I sorry. Trust your guidance. There's a time in life where you got to loose people and let them go, and let them choose what they choose. In our lives, how much of life would be so much more joyous if we would just free everybody to just be where they're at, let them do what they need to do, make sure that our boundaries are clear, and have non-defensive boundaries that allow the flow of love. So let's do that right now. And so, this is the essence of life. Freedom is the essence of life. So just open your heart, open your mind, and realize that just because you set other people free doesn't mean you don't have boundaries or you don't communicate. But it isn't to try to get into their heads and change what they're thinking. And just know that you are free. For yourself first. For yourself first, affirm silently. I loose myself, I let myself go, I fully and freely release myself. All that is happening is fulfilled. I free myself to my highest good. And I free myself to my indwelling guidance. And for anybody else in my world, and that includes religious, political movements, all kinds of things, I loose them, I let them go, I fully and freely release them. All that is happening for them is complete, now and forevermore. I free them to their indwelling guidance as I free myself, and I free them to their highest good as I free myself. And if I need to do more work, I'll do the 7 steps. I'll do further work to release this. The essence of life is freedom, and I want to flow. I want to flow. I want to flow. Thank you, God. And so it is. So now set aside any papers in your hands and open your hands. Be receptive and take a deep breath. And then let it out slowly and just release and let go. I release, I let go. And realize that you can only receive the gift that you're willing to give to another person. And so if you release another person, you're releasing yourself. And realize that you cannot control anyone in your life. You can certainly set boundaries, but you have to free the essence of their being. And when you do that, you experience that freedom for your essence of your being. And so pick somebody in your life that you can release. And in perfect silence, the deepest silence of your being, just decide, I let go of all responsibility for their soul. God, I am ready to see them with new eyes, listen to them with new ears, and join with me in this affirmation silently. I loose you and I let you go. I now fully and freely release you. All that has happened is complete. forevermore. I free you to your highest good. I free myself to my highest good. I free you to your indwelling guidance. And I free myself to my indwelling guidance. And now feel the heightened energy and vibration. The internal feeling. Perhaps you feel a tingling presence that comes with soul freedom. In freedom, we release the flow. And we just rest for a moment with a sense of celebration that for ourselves as well. I release myself and I let myself go. I fully and freely release myself. All that I am is free. The essence of freedom is acceptance of being and the willingness to accept boundaries. It's love and boundaries. And so once again, I loose you, I let you go, I fully and freely release you. All that has happened is complete now and forevermore. I free you to your highest good. I free myself to my highest good. I free you to your indwelling guidance. And I free myself to my indwelling guidance. And I am set free, and in that energy, in that vibration, I experience a great lifting, a great upliftment. And I just say thank you, thank you, thank you. And so it is. We're going to take our offering now, and our offering statement is, I give in the spirit of freedom, and I receive abundantly. Together.
I give in the spirit of freedom, and I receive abundantly.
Silently. And again aloud together. I give in the spirit of freedom, and I receive abundantly, and so it is. Amen.